Yeah, I've got a lot of slides and things, but basically in 1967, I believe July 1967, but the months on various sides, I think that might have been the time we actually got to New Zealand, but we left Singapore. Dad had taken early retirement from the Royal Marines, and we left at the docks, and Parvin and Rustum,
Yes.
who were Baha'is that Mum knew, were there. And there was various other Baha'is, including Mr. Furitan and well, the other Hands of the Cause used to come and stay with Mum because we always had spare room. And of course there was no money for the Hands of the Cause to travel. They went on the smell of an oily rag. And so I've got these slides showing us leaving on a ship which was called the Centaur. And we sailed from Singapore to Fremantle in Western Australia on the Centaur. Now, if everyone who knows their Greek mythology, Centaur is a half man, half horse. And the Centaur lived up to its name in that it was a half cruise ship and half live meat transporting ship. The front half was for cows and the back half was for the rest of us cattle. And it was lovely. It was a lovely, only got 100 people on board, and that's one of my first memories. And we sailed to Fremantle, and after a little time in Perth, playing around on pedal boats in the Swan River, we got on the
train.
Yes, across Australia. I don't know what it's called, Nullarbor Express or something, across the Nullarbor Plain. And after 4 days of a straight line with not seeing anything, my brother swore he saw a kangaroo, but I never did. We got over to the east coast of Australia and met up with Dad's car, which was a Humber Hawker State car. And we drove around
How
a little
did you
bit.
get it over there?
It must have been on the ship,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
and it got put on the train, I think.
That's right, yes.
But it was definitely there.
Yes.
If not, we were in a different car, and our car went straight to New Zealand. It could have done that. It might have been that. I'm not exactly sure. So we were up in the Blue Mountains in 1967, and I think, did you go to the Baha'i temple then at all? Do you know the one? Because it would have been, might have done.
We didn't have a temple in New Zealand.
No, in Australia. When we got to Australia, we went over on the train.
I don't remember that.
No, I don't think we did.
We did. No.
Maybe we were in a different part. But I do remember Mum and Dad telling me about a little town that they went through. This was just after Australia had converted from pound shillings and pence to dollars. And this little town wasn't going to have a bar of it. They were sticking with their traditional money and they were recycling it. I don't know how long that lasted for, but it was quite nice. And then we got on another ship, an Italian ship out of Sydney. We've got some lovely slides of these very spiffy looking Italians with their pointy shoes and shiny coats. And we sailed for New Zealand. And we arrived in Auckland in, I believe, July 1967. And we stayed with Mum's good friend, the Liftons, Bob and Mary Valda? No. It'll come to me.
Wendy.
And
You
Bob
nursed together.
Yes, they were. And Bob was a vet. And we stayed with them for a month or so while our car came out. And then, due to the fact that our very large Humber Hawker State car had a very small motor, we had the tiniest caravan you've ever seen on the back. And Mum and Dad and us were going to have a tour of New Zealand before we ended up in Christchurch. We were going to Christchurch because that was the only, at the time, it was the only relative of ours who lived in New Zealand, and that was Uncle Jack. And
mother's brother.
Your mother's brother, and his wife,
Oh,
Jack and Una. Jack and... No,
Can't remember. No.
And he had been out in New Zealand since the 30s, and he was an engineer of some sort. Was the only man on the street in Christchurch who was not unemployed during the Depression. He used to make his own tools. I think I still have a few of them floating around. So we went from a Singapore tropical weather, where all European kids in those days had zero body fat, absolutely zero. I must tell you a story about Singapore before we go. I was in a kindergarten there, Sunnyside Kindergarten, full of military kids and very wealthy Indian and Chinese kids. And I rather liked Indian and Chinese kids much more than the other ones, especially. But I never saw them as being wealthy because even though they had guards and chauffeurs and probably bulletproof limousines, occasionally I got dropped off in the dad's army jeep, Land Rover, by his Batman who would salute me. So I was the coolest of them all. And we had a birthday party, and Mum and Dad love kids. And so we had, 15 or 20 of these kids. I don't think there was any Europeans amongst them at all turning up with all their vehicles and all their guards and all their drivers who just couldn't fit in the house and had to go sit out on the street. And Dad, of course, used to run the most amazing parties for children. There were games for Ethiopia. And I remember him saying there was these two little Chinese girls, like porcelain dolls, who basically sat on his knee and said, well, could we have some ice cream, please? And of course, he was just completely besotted and did whatever they wanted, so they were fine, you know. So Dad always did good parties throughout the time in New Zealand and things like that. So we moved to Christchurch, settled up in 230 Clyde Road in an old farmhouse, farm villa type bungalow. Large property on what is now a very flash part of Christchurch, if it hasn't deliquefied. And of course, Mum got back into the Baha'i community. It was on the local spiritual assembly.
And nursing.
No, the nursing didn't start till Auckland.
Oh, really?
Yes, you remember the Clonic Clinic in Auckland?
Oh, yeah, I do. Yes.
But she was busy enough with the Baha'is, and again, whenever the Hands of the Cause, like Mr. Furitan would come, they would come and stay with us. And we were just going through some of the letters from various hands. I'm thinking, slightly sweating in my archivist role, that maybe I should offer them to the to the Baha'i community at some point. So there's sort of correspondence from various people. When the Baha'i faith was so small, you know, it was still small, and everyone knew everybody.